the world, and in particular the government and people of Ukraine, as a member of this Council. We join the 10 other members of the Council in seeking to deploy in the strongest terms the Russian Federation's invasion of Ukraine, because that act breaches Russia's obligation as a member of the United Nations. Its obligation to respect the provisions of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter. By not refraining from the use of force in its relations with Ukraine, the Russian Federation had chosen to violate without justification the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine, even as several world leaders had appealed for dialogue to find a peaceful settlement of the situation. The Russian Federation's actions, which have assailed the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, have threatened the global order and the balance of peace and security. We have also taken note of the Russian Federation's letter presented to the Council that seeks to indicate that its use of force against Ukraine was in self-defense, but dismiss it in the face of its all-out military action against Ukraine. We are pained by the unnecessary and rising number of deaths that have been occasioned by the invasion, and we call on the Russian Federation to immediately withdraw its forces from Ukraine and to recommit to dialogue and diplomacy. Besides our own assessment that Ukraine presented no imminent threat to the Russian Federation, the letter is also interpreted within the context of Russia's own public declarations over the course of the past days, which have shown to the world that rather than a security merit, this has been about the use of force against its weakened neighbor because it could. At the beginning of its military build-up on the borders of Ukraine, we were told that what was being observed was a normal military exercise. When concerns over the massive build-up were made, the Russian Federation informed the world that its troops were on its side of the borders and had no intention of crossing the frontiers of Ukraine. At the point, we were also informed that troops were being considered to be sent to the Donbas region of Ukraine in the context of peacekeeping. Today, the whole world knows better, as we met in an emergency session on Wednesday night to afford yet another opportunity for peace. The trust and good faith crucial for diplomatic engagement was broken in a cruel and dismissive manner. The battle against Kiev may yet be won, but the goodwill of the world has been lost. The use of force as a basis for secure international agreement has no place in our modern international order, and the world cannot accept this. Ghana is deeply disappointed by the actions of the Russian Federation, a permanent member of the Security Council. Its actions have fallen short of the higher standards expected of all those states that are considered as the enduring guardians of international peace and security. Indeed, for those members of the Council with a special privilege, there is also special responsibility. I reiterate Ghana's full support for the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine in accordance with the Charter. At a time that the world looked up to the Council to send a strong message that threats and use of force against other states are unacceptable, we have been unable to do so, not because there is no broad agreement to do so, but because the way and manner the Security Council has been structured to function has constrained us. The present situation creates difficult choices, which we all must consider and carefully reflect upon as we proceed with the long-standing efforts to reform the United Nations Security Council and how it operates. Fortunately, the ongoing process in the General Assembly provides an opportunity, and all member states must genuinely commit to that process. If we fail to act proactively, our inactions would cost us permanently. Before concluding, let me indicate Ghana's continuing concern over the situation of the civilian populations in all parts of the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine, as well as the welfare of more than 1,000 Ghanaian students and several nationals in that country. We recall that in accordance with international humanitarian law, there are consequences for unlawful actions against civilian populations. Also, as the Secretary General rightly said in his press engagement on Wednesday night, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia would come at great cost to most of our countries. Already, oil prices have gone beyond $100. Inflation in most of our countries have begun to rise. Investment decisions are being pulled back. The already difficult situation of economic stagnation triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic is beginning to worsen. The consequences of these adverse developments is that the fragility of most of our countries will deepen and further risk created for global stability. The actions that have taken place against Ukraine are therefore far-reaching and require even greater solidarity. First, with the people of Ukraine who bear the direct and immediate impact of this unjustified action that violates the Charter and the principles of international law, but also for the many, especially developing countries, whose populations are facing severe austerity. May we find the wisdom and common purpose to overcome the difficult moment we face. Ours is the call for peace. Let's give peace still yet a chance. I thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Бразилии.
Mr. President, Brazil regrets that the Security Council was unable to react to a breach of international peace and security that is still happening as we speak. During the negotiations, Brazil favored a text that could maintain space for dialogue among all the parties, while sending a decisive message for respect to international law and to the basic principles that for more than 75 years have saved us from a war of wide proportions. We thank the proponents for their flexibility in several aspects of the draft during the negotiations. Mr. President, the framing of the use of force against Ukraine as an act of aggression in the draft, a precedent that has seldom been used in this Council, signals to the world the gravity of the situation, but could also downplay other times when force was used against the territorial integrity of member states with no equivalent reaction from the Council. Indeed, we could have ended up with a text that is more conducive to reconciliation. Brazil has fought for that. However, under the current circumstances, not even a different text would have been enough to allow the Council to fulfill its responsibility to maintain international peace and security today. No country, elected or non-elected, with or without veto power, should be able to use force against the territorial integrity of another state with no Council reaction. The Council's paralysis, when world peace is at stake, could lead to its irrelevance when we need it most. It is our collective responsibility not to allow this to happen. I thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Объединенных Арабских Эмиратов.
Thank you, Mr. President. The serious developments in Ukraine, we all agree, undermine regional and international peace and security. And throughout this crisis, my country has consistently called for de-escalation and dialogue. We placed great hope in the various diplomatic initiatives and channels aimed at resolving the crisis. And those calls reflected our alarm at the consequences of this crisis for civilians present in Ukraine, as well as for the region and for the international community. And we emphasize the importance of ensuring that humanitarian assistance reaches those in need and call on all parties to respect international humanitarian law, prioritize the protection of civilians, and allow for the unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance. We further believe that every member state of the United Nations has the right to security, sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Being from the Middle East, we are intimately aware of the critical importance of a stable regional security environment and of de-escalation, diplomacy, and dialogue as the basis for that security. Similarly, we understand from experience and share the need for inclusive and consultative processes. We support the draft resolution's emphasis on the need to adhere to the principles of international law and to the Charter of the United Nations. And that must be the basis of the resumption of dialogue and the pathway forward now that that resolution has not been adopted. The UAE restates its commitment to the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of all member states of the United Nations. We urge for immediate de-escalation and cessation of hostilities, and we once more underscore our readiness to work with members of this Council towards that goal. The results of this vote were a foregone conclusion, but the avenues for dialogue and diplomacy must remain open more urgently than ever before, and we must pursue them together. This is the clear sentiment that this Council is united on. Thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Кении.
Mr. President, Kenya has voted in favor of the draft resolution to affirm Article 2 of the United Nations Charter that all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. We voted yes to register our opposition to the breaching of the territorial integrity of Ukraine by the Russian Federation. We voted with hearts that are heavy with sympathy for the people of Ukraine. We offer our condolences to all the Ukrainian families that have suffered the devastating loss of loved ones to this unnecessary war. Our affirmative vote today transcends the tragedy unfolding in Ukraine. We voted yes, also having in mind the justifications for past interventions by other powerful states using resolutions from this very Council that seriously compromised international peace and security. Even as deserved condemnations ring out today about the breach of Ukraine's sovereignty, history's condemnations are a loud silence in this room. We cannot help but recall that Africa's Sahel region is in terrible turmoil due to the hasty and ill-considered intervention in Libya a decade ago. On that occasion, the African Union sought more time for diplomacy. Its counsel was ignored, and what resulted was not peace or the safety and security of the Libyan people. Instead, terror was unleashed on African peoples in the countries to the south of Libya. There have been yet other actions of similar magnitude that have brought us to this unfortunate pass. Today, the precious fabric of our charter lies torn and trampled and threatened with further harm if there is no urgent and visionary leadership with a faith in diplomacy pushing in the opposite direction. If the United Nations Charter could speak for itself, it would vote for this resolution to affirm its central role in safeguarding our collective peace. It would remind all members of the Security Council and the United Nations that the Charter contains the tools for the pacific settlement of their disputes by negotiation, inquiry, mediation, conciliation, arbitration, judicial settlement, resort to regional agencies or arrangements, or other peaceful means of their own choice. By failing to adopt this resolution, we deeply regret that the Security Council has failed to stop the infringement of the sovereignty of a member of the United Nations. I thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Китая.
谢谢主席先生。主席先生，中国对乌克兰局势的最新发展深表关切。局势发展到今天这一步，是中方不愿看到的。中国一贯根据事情本身的是非曲直， 决定自身的立场，主张尊重各国主权和领土完整。联合国宪章的宗旨和原则应当得到共同遵守。我们一直呼吁各方在平等和相互尊重的基础上，通过和平方式寻求解决彼此关切的合理方案，欢迎并鼓励一切致力于推动外交解决的努力，支持俄方同乌方通过谈判解决问题。安理会在过去1周举行了2次紧急会议，各方已经就当前局势充分阐明立场关切。面对当前十分复杂敏感的形势，安理会既要做出必要反应，也要十分慎重。任何行动都要真正有利于化解危机，而不是火上浇油。如果处置不当，一味施压制裁，只会导致更多的人员伤亡、更大的财产损失、更复杂混乱的局面、更难以弥合的分歧，彻底关上和平解决的大门，最终受害的还是广大无辜民众。这样的教训十分惨痛，必须深刻汲取。基于上述，中方对决议草案投了弃权票。我想强调，乌克兰问题不是今天才出现的，当前事态也不是一夜之间突然发生的，而是各种因素长期共同作用的结果。中方倡导共同、综合、合作、可持续的安全观。中方认为，一国的安全不能以损害他国安全为代价，地区安全更不能以强化甚至扩张军事集团来保障。各国的合理安全关切都应予以尊重。在北约连续5轮东扩的情况下，俄罗斯在安全方面的正当诉求理应得到重视和妥善解决。乌克兰应该成为沟通东西方的桥梁，而不应成为大国对抗的前沿。我们强烈呼吁有关各方保持最大限度的克制，缓和紧张局势，避免平民伤亡。乌克兰危机的最终解决，还是要摒弃冷战思维，重视和尊重各国合理安全关切，通过谈判形成均衡、有效、可持续的欧洲安全机制。我们呼吁各方尽快回到外交谈判和政治解决的轨道上来，展现诚意、善意，做出政治决断，通过对话协商实现乌克兰问题的全面解决。我谢谢你，主席先生。
Спасибо. Сейчас я сделаю заявление в качестве представителя Российской Федерации. Российская Федерация проголосовала против представленного нам сегодня антироссийского и антиукраинского проекта резолюции Совета Безопасности. Почему антироссийского, думаю, объяснять не надо. Достаточно хотя бы бегло на него взглянуть. Почему антиукраинского? Потому что этот документ, вне всякого сомнения, противоречит коренным интересам украинского народа, поскольку пытается спасти и закрепить на Украине ту систему власти, которая подвела эту страну к трагедии, длящейся вот уже как минимум 8 лет. Благодарим тех, кто не стал поддерживать этот проект. Не стану отвечать тем, кто только что обвинял Россию в злоупотреблении правом вето. Главная причина нашего негативного голосования – это не то, что есть в проекте, а то, чего там нет. Если бы его авторы попытались придать ему хотя бы отдаленно напоминающий сбалансированный документ вид, они не оставили бы за скобками вопросы, о которых нельзя забывать в контексте украинской проблемы. В частности, за скобками осталось то, как пришедшая к власти в результате неконституционного госпереворота в Киеве в феврале 2014 года майданная хунта развязала войну против жителей востока страны, обстреливая мирные кварталы из пушек и систем залпового огня и сбрасывая на дончан и луганчан бомбы. Осталось за скобками то, как украинская власть при попустительстве своих западных покровителей последовательно и цинично уходила от выполнения минских договоренностей, стержневым элементом которых был прямой диалог с жителями востока страны. При этом размещенные на линии соприкосновения украинские каратели, прежде всего из радикальных и неонацистских батальонов, методично, день за днем, обстреливали жилые районы ЛНР и ДНР, убивая женщин, детей, стариков. Это, кстати, продолжается и сегодня. Только сегодня погибло 4 мирных жителя от рук украинских вооруженных сил. А как можно не упомянуть про леденящие кровь преступления укронацистов за эти 8 лет? Про заживо сгоревших протестующих против Майдана в Одессе. Про расстрел мирных протестующих на самом Майдане неизвестными снайперами. Расследование обеих этих трагедий майданный режим целенаправленно заматывал. При этом виновные в одесской трагедии известны и особо не скрываются. А вот альтернативные расследования и признание самих снайперов недвусмысленно подтверждают, что бойня на площади Независимости была провокацией лидеров Майдана. Мы специально провели в прошлом году неформальное заседание Совета Безопасности по формуле Ария по обоим этим сюжетам, чтобы дать коллегам по Совету Безопасности больше информации на этот счет. Однако в ответ в лучшем случае услышали от западных партнеров лишь штампованные клише о российской пропаганде. Какой текст резолюции по украинской теме может быть без этих упомянутых мной сюжетов? Хорошо было бы включить в проекте честную оценку роли в раздувании украинского кризиса наших западных коллег, которые не только стояли за майданным переворотом, но и фактически выдали Киеву карт-бланш на любые действия и шаги, немыслимые для любого цивилизованного государства. Здесь и вопиющая дискриминация русского языка и, соответственно, русскоязычных жителей. И прославление пособников Гитлера вкупе с запретом на чествование настоящих героев Украины, освобождавших ее от нацизма. И созданный религиозный раскол в этой стране. Под ваши сказки о торжестве демократии на Украине майданные власти и националисты занимались безнаказанными убийствами политических оппонентов, преследовали оппозицию, закрывали оппозиционные телеканалы, где можно было почерпнуть хотя бы относительную объективную информацию. 6 из таких телеканалов были закрыты только при Зеленском. А как забыть о накачке Украины оружием, из которого потом убивались мирные жители на Донбассе? Вы сделали Украину пешкой в вашей геополитической игре, не заботясь совершенно об интересах украинского народа. Ответственность за то, что происходит сейчас, лежит не только на нынешнем украинском руководстве, но и на вас, господа. И ваш сегодняшний проект резолюции не что иное, как еще один ход в этой жестокой и бесчеловечной по отношению к Украине шахматной партии. Коллеги, сейчас весь эфир западных СМИ забит сообщениями о том, как мирное население Киева и ряда других украинских городов укрывается в бомбоубежищах и боится за свои жизни, спасаясь от обстрелов. Мы все искренне переживаем за наших соседей, призываем их не поддаваться на провокации. Президент Путин и Министерство обороны России четко заявили и ясно заявили, что удары по гражданским целям наноситься не будут. Но националисты уже используют мирных жителей в качестве живого щита. В частности, категорически осуждаем размещение националистами в жилых кварталах позиций артиллерии и систем залпового огня. Это прямое нарушение норм международного гуманитарного права, включая статьи 51 и 58 первого дополнительного протокола к Женевским конвенциям. Видим, как используют ситуацию в пропагандистских упражнениях западные политики и СМИ. Хочу спросить их, а где вы были 8 лет? Почему вас не трогали обстрелы и убийства на Донбассе? Почему вы вообще не замечали, что в ЛНР и ДНР проживают 4 с лишним миллиона жителей, которых вы в лучшем случае называли пророссийскими сепаратистами? Почему не одернули Порошенко, который сказал, что жители Донбасса будут гнить в подвалах? Или Зеленского, который называл их нелюдями и особами? Кстати, сказать не могу не отметить, что в пропагандистском угаре наши коллеги очень часто используют картинки из Донбасса, выдавая их за последствия так называемой российской агрессии на Украине. Таких фейков сейчас очень много. Такими фейками сейчас переполнен интернет и многие телеграм-каналы. Как и видеороликами о российских ударах по мирным кварталам, которые снимались в других регионах мира и к Украине отношения не имеют. На сегодня на это обратила внимание британская корпорация BBC, выпустив статью «Ukraine conflict. Many misleading images have been shared online». Здесь есть все. И фотографии с парадов, и фотографии американских самолетов, которые бомбили Ливию, и фотографии из Сирии, и даже взрыв в Бейруте, который выдается как то, что происходило на Украине. Я перешлю вам этот ролик, уважаемые члены, эту статью, уважаемые члены Совета Безопасности. Отдельно, конкретно хотел бы обратиться к своему французскому, британскому и американскому коллеге. Мой поспред Франции сказал, что на Украине сейчас происходит убийство гражданских лиц. Это неправда. Российские войска не бомбят украинские города. И мы сказали, что этим лицам ничего не угрожает. И нет подтверждения, достоверного подтверждения гибели гражданских лиц. По спреду Великобритании я хотел бы сказать, что то, что вы даете за то, что российская бронетехника давит мирных жителей, я видел этот репортаж сегодня. Хочу вам сообщить, что это из ролика понятно, что это тяжелый гусеничный зенитный комплекс, который называется «Стрела-10», который состоит на вооружении вооруженных сил Украины. На вооружении России таких комплексов нет. Они просто устарели. Вот такими фейками вы пользуетесь. Американские коллеги, хочу сказать, что это же касается и заявления о якобы разбомбленном детском саду. Это фейк. Нам, конечно, трудно тягаться с Соединенными Штатами в количестве вторжений к своим соседям. Я воздержусь от перечисления агрессий, которые совершили США за свою историю. Но вам ли читать нам мораль? В заключение хочу подчеркнуть, мы не ведем войну с Украиной и украинским народом, а проводим специальную военную операцию против националистов и для защиты жителей Донбасса, денацификации и демилитаризации. Эти задачи будут достаточно скоро выполнены, и украинский народ получит возможность вновь самостоятельно решать свою судьбу, живя в этом мире, при этом в мире добрососедстве и сотрудничестве со всеми соседями. Сейчас я возобновляю свои функции председателя Совета Безопасности и предоставляю слово представителю Соединенных Штатов для дополнительного заявления.
Colleagues, I asked to take the floor for a different reason, and so I'm not going to respond to the atrocious lies and propaganda and misinformation that you just heard from our Russian colleague. What I asked to take the floor for was to recall the names of some of our colleagues who were not named earlier due to the rapidly moving response to these events in Ukraine. Some of them were left off, who were sponsors of the resolution, and I'd just like to highlight their names because we so appreciate what they have done. Barbados, Croatia, Estonia, the Gambia, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, Japan, Kiribati, Lesotho, Marshall Islands, Monaco, North Macedonia, Palau, Papua New Guinea, and Suriname. I want to thank you and all of you for your support. We will continue to all speak in one voice in the days ahead to address the atrocious situation that we see happening every day on the ground, despite what we've heard from our Russian colleagues. I now thank you.
Спасибо. Сейчас я предоставляю слово представителю Украины.
Distinguished members of the Security Council, I will not dignify the Russian diabolical script that is rather a letter of application for an upscale seat in the hell by commenting it. I would like to use this opportunity to thank the parents of every ambassador here, to thank the people of the democratic nations who put these ambassadors in their seats, to tell the children of those ambassadors that they should be proud of their parents, that they have voted in favor of the resolution. I thank my good friend Nicolas from France, Rolando from Brazil, my good friend Hajar from Albania, Linda, Barbara, Mona, my good friend from Mexico, Martin from Kenya, Ireland, Ghana, Gabon. I thank dozens and dozens of co-sponsors who would vote in favor of the resolution should they have a chance to vote, but they will have this chance in days to come. The draft recalls the obligation of all states under Article 2 of the UN Charter to refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. The draft called on Russia to stop its offensive against Ukraine. And the memories are very fresh. The Security Council was discussing the ways to prevent the war quite recently in this very chamber. And at the very same moment, deadly airstrikes were dropped on civilian heads across my country. And the Russian troops crossed the Ukrainian border from the territory of Russia. The territory of Belarus was used for missile attacks, and the troops were marching from the occupied parts of the Ukraine's Donbass and Crimea. Last night was the most horrific for Kiev since, just imagine, 1941, when it was attacked by Nazis. Last night was attacked by someone who pretends they are fighting with neo-Nazism. Therefore, I'm not surprised that Russia voted against. Russia is keen on continuing its Nazi-style course of action. The Kremlin regime should not be called Russian regime. The Kremlin regime should be called Russist regime. A couple of hours ago, my president said, and I quote, "Tonight, the enemy will use all the forces at their disposal to break our resistance, vile, cruel, and inhuman. Tonight, they will storm. We must all understand what awaits us. We have to persevere tonight. The fate of Ukraine is being decided right now," end of quote. We just heard something that the Russian ambassador wanted to present as assurances from himself and from his leadership that it's all provocation. And that he urged us not to yield to provocations. Do you remember how many times he said that, and his deputies said in this very room that there will be no invasion, no attacks? Do you remember how, during the previous session, he was walking out of the chamber, trying to call someone, not knowing what was going on? How we can trust you? How we can trust your assurance? You have no idea what is on the mind of your president. Your words have less value than a hole in the New York pretzel. The Russian Federation that occupied by treachery the seat of the Security Council member in 1991 violates daily not only the Charter, but also the provisional rules of procedure of this Council. Because if Russia did not violate the provisional rules, then Mr. Nebenzia had to follow Article Rule 20. Let me quote. I begin the quote. "For the proper fulfillment of the responsibilities of the presidency, he should not preside over the Council during the consideration of a particular question with which the member he represents," that's the Russian Federation, "is directly connected. He," the rule reads, "shall indicate his decision to the Council not to preside." So since the Council is not ruled by the current presidency by rules, I will be probably also unruly. And I will ask all of you to dedicate a moment of complete silence to pray or to meditate if you do not believe in God, for peace, to pray for souls of those who has been already killed, for souls of those who may be killed. And I invite the Russian ambassador to pray for salvation. Please, ladies and gentlemen, let us spend a moment in a complete silence.
Прошу прощения, прежде чем мы перейдем к минуте молчания, я хочу включить в этот список тех людей, которые погибли за все эти годы на Донбассе. Они тоже заслуживают того, чтобы помянуть их. Любая человеческая жизнь драгоценна. Не надо забывать о них тоже.
I do not excuse your rattle, but let's, ladies and gentlemen, spend a moment in complete silence. Thank you. I thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let me continue with my statement. I'm saddened, however, that there is a small handful of members that seem to be still tolerating the war. Any complex historical context could not be used to justify what is going on. And I may say to some, it is exactly the safety of your nationals right now in Ukraine that you should be the first to vote to stop the war, to save your nationals in Ukraine, and not to think about whether you should or should not vote because of the safety of your nationals. Nothing could justify missile shellings of kindergarten and an orphanage, hospitals that happened today. And in fact, you know, one of my relatives got a stroke a couple of days ago, and the person cannot be evacuated even to the shelter because the person is not movable. So the person is in the hospital in the city of Kyiv. These attacks are war crimes and violations of the Rome Statute, whether you party to it or not. We are collecting these and other facts and will immediately send them to The Hague. And responsibility is inevitable. Nothing could justify today's deliberate shelling by a Russian warship of a Moldovan flagged chemical tanker with the Russian crew. Imagine. Or a Panamanian flag cargo ship near Odessa port in the Black Sea. It is a flagrant violation of international law of the sea. Is it a time to discuss historical reflections against the backdrop of the alarming situation in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, seized by the Russian armed groups? They detain the staff of the nuclear power plant, not allowing them to rotate as required by technical safety rules. Another matter of alarm that the control levels of gamma radiation, those rates in the exclusion zone, have already been exceeded because of the damage of the topsoil due to the movement of a large number of heavy military equipment, including tanks. And as a result, there is contamination by radioactive dust. Dear Security Council members, as of previous night, midnight, almost 140 persons were killed on the Ukrainian side and 316 persons wounded during, that was the first day of the Russian invasion. Many objects of civilian infrastructure were ruined. To stop the advance of the Russian tanks, a young gentleman, a hero, blew himself on a bridge. He killed himself to destroy the bridge, not to let the Russian tanks to go ahead. But the destruction takes place not only in cities. 80% of infrastructure of the small town of Shestya, located on the government-controlled part of Donbass, have been completely destroyed, according to the local administration. Occasionally, the name of the town is translated as happiness. That's actually the name of the town. Shestya, happiness. What a grotesque irony. It speaks volumes what kind of happiness the Russian Federation is bringing to Donbass, to Ukraine, to other nations. Sooner or later, if we continue to allow Russia to go ahead with its diabolical plan. And rest assured, Ambassador, there will be no hospitality to your troops on our territory. Ukraine has been executing its right for self-defense according to the Article 51. It's not the Russia that executes. Your perverse reading of the Charter is so sick that it's impossible to interpret. Calling occupational troops peacekeepers, claiming the right of self-defense, lunacy. The Russian troops are suffering heavy losses. Aircraft, helicopters, tanks, trucks, and most importantly, personnel. You can stop the vote in this chamber. But what may stop the war is unfortunately the bodies and thousands of bodies of Russian soldiers that will be delivered to their mothers in Russia, whether you like it or not, because we have to defend our territories, we have to defend ourselves on our territory. Thousands of Ukrainians have already joined the Ukrainian army or territorial defense forces. And the resolve and dedication of civilians joining the territorial defense forces is the best proof that we will not surrender, even if you succeed to temporarily occupy additional chunks of our territory. Ukraine has broken diplomatic relations with Russia, something that had to be done 8 years ago. We call on our partners to follow our example or to find other ways to sever relationships, diplomatic relationships with Russia. We call on international organizations to ban or suspend Russia's membership. The latter has happened today, in fact, as the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, by overwhelming majority, I mean, it's almost like consensus, adopted the decision to suspend the Russian Federation from its rights of representation in the Committee of Ministers and in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. In the first place, you shouldn't have been invited to the Council of Europe. You were invited to the Council of Europe, this temple of human rights, in the middle of the Chechen War. In the very middle of the Chechen War, even before the Khasav-Yurt agreements. For hypocritical political reasons, the Europeans then were of the opinion that it's better to invite you, and you were invited in the middle of the war, killing thousands and thousands of your own citizens in Chechnya. We count upon the proper reaction by the international community to medieval atrocities by Russia in Ukraine. For today, a number of countries have already imposed sanctions on Russia, and the burden must be heavy. And if you say that sanctions is nothing, that I'm sure that the bodies of killed soldiers of Russia is not nothing, even if you are completely diabolical. We are sincerely grateful to the UN for its prompt decision to support the humanitarian response in Ukraine, as well as we highly commend the UN efforts to encourage major humanitarian donors to make additional funding available. I thank the Secretary General for his statement to this effect. And I have a plea. Stop harassing the Secretary General. Stop attacking him. Show respect to the institution. Stop wiping your feet of the Secretary General, who is a very nice person and a dedicated supporter of the UN Charter. We remain open for negotiations, but don't put words in our mouths. Don't manipulate with our statements about negotiations. We are sick of your interpretations. Speak on your own behalf. Do not speak on our behalf. This was stated by the President of Ukraine, that we are open to negotiations on a permanent basis, and we have been saying that all along. It is you who killed Normandy 4. It is you who killed the Minsk agreements. All that gibberish about who said what and when in Normandy 4 by no means can justify the offensive. By no means can justify thousands and thousands of your troops on our territory. Your today's call of your president to the Ukrainian army to remove the government of Ukraine? Are you crazy? Show respect for the core principles enshrined in the UN Charter. Sovereign equality, non-use of force or threat of force against territorial integrity, and political independence. In my opening remarks, I said that parents of ambassadors here, all ambassadors but you, are proud of their children. And children of the ambassadors are proud of their parents. it's so painful to think what your family think about you when you lie every day. The Russian people deserve peace, democracy. The Russian people deserve liberty, and they will have it. If not tomorrow, because tomorrow is not possible, then probably in near future. Thank you.
Список ораторов исчерпан, но прежде чем мы завершим заседание, я хочу прокомментировать только одну вещь и успокоить членов Совета. Я много и мог бы прокомментировать выступление постпреда Украины. Я оставлю на его совести то хамство, которое он позволяет себе, выступая, и не буду говорить об этом. Это дело его совести. Но я хочу сказать одну вещь. Вчера это сообщение Минобороны России. Вчера, 24 февраля, подразделениями воздушно-десантных войск России взята под полный контроль территория в районе Чернобыльской атомной электростанции. С военнослужащими отдельного батальона охраны атомной электростанции Украины достигнута договоренность о совместном обеспечении безопасности энергоблоков и саркофага Чернобыльской атомной электростанции. Мы не хотим, чтобы в Украине появилась грязная бомба. Представитель Минобороны отметил, что персонал станции продолжает обслуживать ее в штатном режиме и отслеживает радиоактивную обстановку. Радиоактивный фон в районе атомной электростанции в норме. А вот сообщение из Вены. Уровень радиации на Чернобыльской атомной электростанции низкий и угрозы для населения отсутствуют. Об этом заявил в пятницу генеральный директор Международного агентства по атомной энергии Рафаэль Гросси. Список ораторов исчерпан. Заседание закрывается.